Hi, it's Luke at Out of Darts. Today we are going to show you how to take your raw Koda magazines like these and turn them into beautiful colors like these. Let's get going. These are the Koda Mags. They are made of glass fiber nylon, and because they are made of nylon, they can be dyed. Now, I've been experimenting with dyeing them different colors, and this process couldn't be any easier. In this video, I'm going to show you everything you need to do this process at home and how to do it, and we're going to keep it nice and short. Our magazines come in two colors. They come in a raw material which has no dye whatsoever. This will result in much brighter colors, and they come in this gray. And I will show some comparisons at the end of the video, but these are examples of what you can get out of the gray ones. Now, same colors will be brighter with a brighter color, but both take dye just fine. Before we get going any further, I do want to mention, do this with parental supervision if you are under 18, and do use caution and common sense. You do need to use a stove or a kettle to heat up water, so keep that in mind. So the first thing you're going to need is a heat source. You're going to need to be able to boil water, and that's all you need to do is be able to boil it. You can do this with a kettle. Today we're going to do it with a camp stove because I don't have a kettle here in the warehouse, so we're going to be heating up some water with the camp stove. Next, you're going to need whatever it is you're going to dye. Today we're going to dye these two Koda Mags, along with these prototype rival wheels that are coming out soon, and a set of day brakes while we're at it, because acetal will take dye fairly well too. If you're heating over a regular stove like I'm doing here, say in your kitchen, you will need a stainless steel pot. As long as you use a good stainless steel pan, it will not damage your pan or dye your pan in any way because the dye does not take to stainless steel. Next, you're going to need something to actually put your magazine or your object in that you're going to dye. We're going to use these bins because they fit Koda Mags quite well. These are made of polypropylene. They're available at Costco, I believe is where I picked them up. Do note that whatever plastic you use, you will end up with some haziness. Here you can see some color shift from previous batches of dye. So make sure you're not using a container that you don't mind changing the color of somewhat. You'll also want gloves if you don't want stained hands after the project, and I would recommend either latex or, in this case, I'm using vinyl. You'll need a scale for measuring out dye, or you can use some sort of measuring cup. Just again, keep in mind, if you use a measuring cup that's plastic, you're going to dye your plastic measuring cup. Lastly, you're going to need some dye. Now, I'm using standard RIT dye, and this is the all-purpose. I've heard the synthetic also works fine, but this one seems to work very, very well. I've done about a dozen mags and had no issues. Keep in mind that when you are looking at these colors, the color you're going to get on your product is actually going to be different than what you see on here, and that's because there is some base pigment that's already in this magazine or in your part. The closer to white that your part is, the closer it's going to match the actual color here. So choose a brighter color than you want. For instance, here was a gray mag that was dyed to blue, and this is the blue I used. You can see it's considerably darker. Now, before I get this pot boiling, I want to be very clear, do this all at your own risk, both for the products you're dyeing and for your house. Please use common sense. This is best done in the kitchen. We're doing this here at the warehouse, but I have got a fire extinguisher sitting right here because we are opening a flame, and we've got plenty of ventilation in here as well. In the case of the Koda magazines, you can drop this whole magazine in here and dye it with the spring and everything intact. It's not going to hurt anything. However, when you do that, you are going to get some dark marks and light marks around where these don't equally sit in the dye and where some dye and water sit longer than in other parts. So I would recommend go ahead and take your spring out, take your follower, and you've got 3 pieces that need to be dyed. I'm going to prep these and have them set aside, ready to go. All right, so to keep things simple, I'm going to put one of each color Koda in each of these bins. I'm going to put one of each flywheel type, and then I've got one of each of the bottom cap and the follower. This will just keep things really simple. And I'm going to put the exact same amount of water in both. You can do this by measuring or by looking at the level of the two next to each other. Now to wait for that water to boil. So we are ready to turn off our boil here. We're going to do 30 minutes for the 3 primary colors. I'm going to do a light blue or aquamarine. I'm going to do purple, and I'm going to do cherry red. And then with the cherry red, we're also going to do a 5-minute batch. So I'm going to move this all to the floor because there's no way I'm lifting this kettle above and pouring here. I'd feel much safer on the floor. So we'll go over there. All right, so I'm first going to dump the water in, and then I'm going to add the dye. I'm going to add 2 ounces of each RIT, and I'm going to do this simply by measuring, by tearing this, and then going -2, and I'll just keep dumping out until I've got -2 ounces. Before you use this, you do want to read the instructions. You have to give these a good shake. I have been shaking these as we've been going along, so they should be mostly ready here. All right. No, wrong one. Now I'm ready to take the 5-minute batch out. Now normally I would probably use tongs, but since I neglected to bring those, what I'm gonna do for the other ones is just wait. So I will dunk these in water, and this will be our 5-minute test batch. The rest of these will be cool enough to touch by the time they are done. So now we've got these all going. We've got 25 minutes more on these, so we'll come back when these are cooled and ready to remove. I'm gonna slightly agitate them every once in a while just to make sure the dye is moving around and the parts are moving around. You can flip the parts in there, but I haven't found that completely necessary. After you've completed your soak time that you want, you're going to carefully take them out. I would recommend using tongs at this point. That will make it easier, but you can use a gloved hand. Since it has been sitting for 30 minutes, the water is plenty cool at this point to remove them by hand. After that, you're gonna want to dunk them into a 1 or 2 stage rinse process, or you can simply rinse them in the sink. The key is you wanna get all the dye off of there so you don't rub it on something else. I'd recommend putting them on a towel to dry off. Pretty easy there, nothing special. Just make sure you've rinsed them well. I'm gonna go ahead and put this Koda magazine back together, the red one here. And I wanted to give a quick instruction here in case you're following along with me. There is a fat end and a thin end. And despite this fitting in both directions, it does matter. It'll feed better if you put the fat end in the thicker side of the magazine. And we're gonna go ahead and just feed that in. Not much to this is pretty obvious. You don't need to be very careful when you're removing these caps. You're not gonna break them. And there we have it. So we ended up doing 3 different colors, and then we also did a couple other tests, and I think these turned out just fantastic. I'm super stoked about the new translucent natural color because it really shows through some nice colors. Overall, I'm just getting a much brighter color with the translucent one, and I'm able to see a little bit through it. Now, your mileage may vary depending on how long you leave it in and how dark of a dye you use. With this aquamarine, this is what I got. And then moving on to this cherry red, I got kind of a deep, rich cherry here, but it's very muted. And then the clear one is just bright as can be. But when we move on to the purple, you'll notice that there's less of a difference because this color is just a bit darker, and this is just standard purple. Now, there are 2 ways to change this. If you felt like this was too light, the first thing you can do is take it out earlier. So if you're doing this at home for the first time, what I would recommend is dipping these, and you can pull them out and look at them at, say, 1-minute increments. Just do it with you could put a hook through here would be easy, or a wire hanger, a coat hanger would be great, and then you can kind of dip it in and out. That way you can see if it's getting to your liking. A little harder to reproduce that way, but you just kind of have to match your time, your temp, and your amount of dye and your amount of water. Additionally, we did take a look at trying to abuse one. So we put this magazine directly in the kettle and let it boil for, what would you say, Perry, 5 minutes at least? So 5 minutes rolling boil, sitting at the base of a pan, actually physically touching the bottom of the pan. And I'm happy to report that it's really no worse for wear. The only thing we could notice is that there's a tiny, tiny bit of warping on this base plate, but it doesn't affect anything. So really, if you're doing this and you're gonna throw them directly in a pot, I wouldn't worry too much. You certainly don't need it to boil while you're doing it. But you don't have to be careful with these mags at all. They are extremely, extremely heat resistant due to the glass fiber nylon they are constructed of. Another sort of interesting thing to look at was our 5-minute versus 30-minute. So here in this hand, I have the 5-minute, and here I've got the 30-minute, and you'll notice there's just a slight change. They get a little more rich and a little more color absorbed after 30 minutes. But I think the next thing I'm gonna have to try is actually doing like a 1-minute test to see what that looks like. Similarly, if I pull out the other versions, here's the 30-minute, here's the 5-minute, and I'd say, you know, again, the 30 minutes a little bit richer, it's got a little bit more color pulled in, but not a massive difference. The very last thing I wanted to look at is how did these mags compare to our previous batch? So these are mags that I dyed several months ago. I tried to keep the process approximately the same, though the amounts of liquid in the dye were a little bit different, so you can see that there is a variance. So this is something to keep in mind. If you are going to do multiple batches and you want them to match, you do need to be pretty precise on the time, the temp, the liquid, and the dye. I wasn't identical in process, so there is definitely a variance. Especially, that's actually eggplant. That's a different color, so that's not a good comparison, but the red is certainly a good comparison here. So those, I would say, are almost spot on. They would be hard to tell that they were done in 2 different batches. As for the flywheels, well, clearly I don't have the knowledge to dye the flywheels properly. They either needed a different type of dye or they needed more heat. I suspect it's both, but I'm going to have to ask you. Let me know in the comments if you have a clue what I need to do to dye acetal or Delrin. I'd be curious. They did pick up a little bit of color, but definitely not enough color that they look good. I hope this has been helpful. If you have any questions down in the comments, we'll pin the best question and make sure that we answer it thoroughly. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, I am definitely out of darts, but I've got plenty of mags.